Bomber killer, the German 88mm flak. There is a number attached to the German 88mm flak gun that almost everyone knows. 16,000 shells per bomber. It's the statistic used to frame the weapon as a monument of inefficiency. A desperate, industrial expenditure of steel and explosive for very little return. It's repeated as gospel, a kind of shorthand for the futility of defending the Reich against the combined bomber offensive. The problem is that the Luftwaffe's director of anti-aircraft artillery, General von Renz, never recognized that figure. The British and American bombing surveys did not validate it as a reliable metric of operational effectiveness. It's a myth, really, born from a misunderstanding of what the 88 was actually intended to do. In reality, the true purpose of the German 88mm flak gun was never just about shooting down bombers with sheer volume. Its design and deployment reflected a broader, more complex strategy. One that involved disrupting bomber formations, forcing higher altitudes, and creating psychological pressure. The weapon's effectiveness can't be measured by a single, often misquoted statistic. Instead, it served as a crucial part of the layered air defense, shaping the very nature of the air war over Europe. By focusing exclusively on the kill ratio, we miss the truth. We miss the fact that by 1944, a B-17 flying at 25,000 feet was statistically safer from a Luftwaffe fighter than it was from the gunner sitting in a smoke-filled Grossbatterie outside Berlin. We ignore that the 88 was not trying to knock you down. It was trying to force you off the target, and it succeeded with horrifying consistency. This is not the story of how the 88 became a tank killer. That story has been told. This is the story of what the 88 did to the men who flew against it, and what the decision to prioritize that weapon system cost the German war effort in ways that have been largely overlooked. The metric that masked the real purpose of the flak arm. To understand the 88, you have to forget the box score. You have to stop counting how many bombers fell and start counting how many bombs missed their aim point. By the spring of 1944, the United States Strategic Air Forces had accepted a grim equation. For every 5,000 feet of altitude gained, bombing accuracy was cut in half. So, when you think about it, the intersection of physics and probability is really at the heart of anti-aircraft warfare. It's not about hitting a specific target, but about increasing the odds. Each shell, each burst, is a calculation, a gamble, really, on where the enemy might be. The science is cold, but the consequences are, well, anything but. The 88mm shell did not need to find the fuel tank or the cockpit. It only needed to arrive in the same cubic acre of sky as the formation. When the time fuse functioned correctly, when the 1,500 steel fragments dispersed at a mean velocity of over 2,000 feet per second, the formation did what it was designed to do. It tightened up, it held its course, and it dropped its ordnance from a higher, safer altitude. That altitude was safer for the airplane. It was catastrophic for the mission. General Spaatz stated explicitly in March of 1945 that flak was the single biggest factor affecting bombing accuracy. Not the Messerschmitts, not the weather, the guns. The 88 thus performed its primary function, not in the explosive flash of a direct hit, but in the cold mathematics of dispersion. Every shell that forced a bombardier to reacquire his aim point, every burst that caused a pilot to jink left, translated directly into German industrial capacity that survived until the next raid. The physics of random cruelty. You know, there is a tendency in operational history to treat the aerial campaign as a duel between aces. But the 88 offered no duel. It offered probability. United States Army medical researchers, analyzing wound patterns in the 8th Air Force during the summer of 1944, documented the directional density of 88mm fragmentation. The shell was not a sphere. It did not burst uniformly. When detonated in its preferred orientation, The fragmentation pattern was concentrated in a narrow, horizontal band emanating from the equatorial plane of the projectile. In the 10-inch zone directly above and below that plane, observers recorded over 60% of the lethal fragments. Every burst of flak carried a price, measured not just in metal and machinery, but in lives altered or ended in an instant. The relentless arithmetic of probability determined who would return and who would not. For commanders, the loss of crews and aircraft forced difficult decisions, reshaping strategies and stretching resources thin. For the men, the cost was personal. Each mission a roll of the dice, each empty bunk a reminder of the stakes. The campaign's progress was marked not only by targets destroyed, but by the accumulating toll on both the individuals involved and the broader war effort. This meant that a waist gunner, exposed in the translucent skin of the fuselage, absorbed 21.6% of all flak casualties. The pilot and co-pilot, sitting behind armor plate and instrumentation, accounted for just over 14% combined. The safest position was the ball turret, the most exposed, the most claustrophobic, simply because the gunner was positioned low in the airframe, below the equatorial kill zone of the typical burst. Survival was not a matter of skill. It was a matter of whether your oxygen hose was 3 inches longer, whether your wool sock had fallen down and forced you to lean forward at exactly the moment the canopy shattered. The crews understood this intuitively. They named their ships Flak Magnet, Flak Happy, Flak Rat. They sang about the laws of probability. The flak can't always miss. Somebody's gotta die. It was not fatalism. It was a statistically sound observation. The failure of tactical adaptation and, well, the hidden cost. The German High Command recognized the 88's utility against ground targets early on. In France, in the desert, and on the Russian steppe, it was the emergency solution to the problem of heavy enemy armor. But this emergency, you see, came with a price structure that is rarely accounted for. The 88mm Flak 36 weighed over 7 tons in firing position. It required a crew of up to 10 men and a half-track to move it. To employ it as an anti-tank weapon, the gun had to be preemptively positioned in a prepared, camouflaged pit, often hours or even days before the enemy appeared. This was not an improvised quick draw. It was, in fact, a deliberate ambush. The tactical benefit was undeniable. At Halfaya Pass, 88s destroyed over 80 British tanks. On the Eastern Front, the gun restored the credibility of German anti-armor defense at a time when the 37mm pack was essentially a harassment weapon. But the operational cost was that these guns, each representing thousands of man-hours and critical raw materials, were not on the coast, not in the Ruhr, not defending the Reich from the very bombers that were, piece by piece, dismantling the German economy. By 1943, the Luftwaffe was starved of its own heavy flak batteries because they had been seconded to the army or left in forward positions where they simply could not be redeployed in time to meet the combined bomber offensive. The weapon was, honestly, too effective in the wrong role. It solved immediate tactical crises while exacerbating a strategic one. This is the paradox of the 88. It was so good at killing tanks that it was not where it needed to be when the skies filled with Lancasters and flying fortresses. The ergonomics of desperation. What is rarely discussed is how difficult this weapon was to operate when pressed into the direct fire role. The breech was designed for a gun elevated to 45 degrees, not one leveled at a T-34 at 2,000 meters. To load the piece in the anti-tank configuration, a crewman had to raise a 15-kilogram shell to chest height or higher, repeatedly, under fire, for every round fired. There was no mechanical assist. There was only physical endurance. The sighting equipment was equally compromised. The dial sight for indirect fire was mounted on top of the recuperator cylinder. To use it, the layer had to climb onto the gun carriage, exposing his entire body to counter-battery fire and small arms. This was not a design flaw, it was a design limitation of a weapon never intended for this purpose. That the crews achieved the hit rates they did is a testament to their adaptability, not to the suitability of the platform. the geopolitical life after death. The 88 did not disappear in 1945. It was transferred, sold, and inherited by a half-dozen nations. Spain retained over 140 examples, which remained the backbone of its air defense network well into the post-war era. Argentina had purchased flak 18s as early as 1938, defending Buenos Aires with guns manufactured in Essen. The Italian army operated them alongside their own competent but underproduced 90/53. Even the Viet Cong, decades later, reportedly employed captured 88s against American aircraft, proving that high velocity and a heavy shell never truly become obsolete, only obsolescent. But, you know, the most significant legacy is really lexical. The word flak entered the English language not as an acronym, but as a descriptor for the explosive, hostile reception of an idea. When a politician takes flak, or when a journalist faces a barrage of criticism, the metaphor still retains the original military meaning. A dispersed, randomized pattern of attack designed not to achieve a single kill, but to suppress, disrupt, and degrade accuracy. The etymology is intact, even if the origin is, well, often forgotten. Closing. The 88mm flak gun is remembered as a tank killer because that is the clean narrative. It is the story of the underdog weapon finding its true calling, the field expedient solution that became legendary. It is a good story. It is also, honestly, an incomplete one. The deeper lesson is about the unintended consequences of tactical effectiveness. The 88 was too valuable to leave in the rear, so it was dragged forward. It was too heavy to move quickly, so it stayed in place. It was too scarce to cover every front, so gaps appeared elsewhere. The German war machine, for all its reputation of cold efficiency, consistently cannibalized its own future capability to patch the holes in its present defense. That is the reality the 16,000 shell myth really obscures. The 88 did not fail because it was inaccurate. It failed the Reich because, well, it was asked to do everything, everywhere, all at once, and by the time the bombers appeared over Berlin in broad daylight, there just were not enough of them in the right places to make the sky truly impassable. This channel exists to examine those overlooked intersections of technology, strategy, and human endurance. If you value historical analysis that prioritizes context over cliché, subscribe to War Machiner. Share this video with someone who understands that the real history of warfare is not found in the kill count, but in the decisions that led to the count being what it was.